And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. Revelation chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. Yes, folks, that means today it arrived at the library finally. I went and picked up Come and See, which is the 1985 Soviet World War II film directed by Ilham Klimov, the plot of which IMDb describes as after finding an old rifle, a young boy joins the Soviet resistance movement against the ruthless German forces and experiences the horrors of World War II. So I've been waiting to see this movie for a while. It's been kind of delayed getting the DVD from my local library. So today I'm finally going to watch it. This film kind of languished in a purgatory for about 8 years, as the Soviets, they wanted to make the movie, but they wanted to wait until 1985 to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the end of World War II. This film is also remarkable because it was shot entirely in chronological order, which is, as some people who are interested in filmmaking probably know, that almost never happens. Movies are almost always shot in a sort of, they shoot them in order of convenience, the scenes. You might not be able to get, the farmhouse one week, so you wait and then you shoot those scenes later. And then you go ahead and shoot the ending because, the castle was available that week. They didn't do that with this film. They shot this movie entirely in chronological order. Apparently, the goal there was the director wanted the actors to look progressively more haggard and war-weary as it went on. They didn't want them going into this looking and, relying on makeup to have to create that effect. Also, this movie, they aimed for realism so much that in many of the scenes where there is gunfighting, they used actual guns with actual live ammunition, not the typical stage props or real guns loaded with blanks that you see in most films. This movie is apparently extremely brutal. It's an unrelenting depiction of the horrors of war. That's going to be interesting to see. If you look at any sort of pre-Saving Private Ryan American World War II film, they're all very nostalgic for the war. They all kind of present it as... There's a lot of movies you'll see where they have this kind of like, yeah, we're going to go off and we're going to have fun, and they're all kind of just like propaganda films that are meant to be like, we're fighting the good fight kind of thing. It's probably because America during the first half of the 20th century was pretty much an isolationist country. World War II, most Americans opposed entry into World War II until Pearl Harbor happened. After Pearl Harbor happened, America saw that they had to get involved. Even then, though, a lot of people didn't really see the European front as their fight. They didn't really believe they had a skin in the game. And in fact, a lot of Americans had kind of divided loyalties. There were a lot of German Americans which were loyal to their mother country, and there were a lot of Italian Americans who felt the same way about Benito Mussolini. So while the Pacific Theater was sold as revenge for Pearl Harbor, the European front required a bit more convincing. So you had a lot of World War II films, a lot of propaganda films that were kind of just presented as, we're the big heroes, we need to go and save Britain and France. After the war, there's still plenty of movies that came out with those similar themes that, we are the big heroes that we need to go in and that we went in, and it's kind of presented almost like, it's like a fun thing to do, that war was this great adventure. From what I understand, this film is much different, and it's easy to understand why. The Soviets, they didn't have any say in the matter. They didn't get to choose whether or not they really wanted to fight this war. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union, they steamrolled like half the country. The might of the Soviet Union eventually rolled in, and that was the end of the German Reich. But before that, The Eastern Front saw the worst fighting of the war. The German army was merciless. The Soviet army was equally as merciless to prisoners and deserters. You had the commissars who would shoot people looking to retreat. You had the prison battalions who were basically just, criminals who were sent off to fight rather than waste in jail. It was a brutal affair. And you had entire villages killed. You had there were Cossacks and White Russians who were living in exile, who wanted a chance to get revenge, who signed up with the Nazis. It was a bloody mess. You had volunteers from every Axis-aligned country going to fight the Soviet Union. And, you really gotta say what you will about the Soviet Union being a horrible regime. You really gotta feel for the poor peasants who just get caught in the middle of this whole thing and had to deal with getting shot by the occupying Germans, or getting shot by the Soviets for not fighting hard enough. It's not a pretty scene, and the Soviets knew it. I think they realized that as long as there were still veterans of the war around, they couldn't get away with trying to paint an overly nostalgic view of the war. For the Soviets, there was no John Wayne you want to romanticize. So what I'm predicting from this film is I believe that this film will obviously portray the Germans as, one-sided villains. Don't think that they'll necessarily go the route of portraying the Soviet forces as 100% pure angels, though. I think what you're gonna see here is a sort of a nationalistic or more of a patriotic appeal to them, rather than doing an idealistic celebration. I don't think I'm going to be watching this film and they're going to be, explaining the glorious tenets of Marxist-Leninism. I think it's also going to tread carefully on the Stalin question, because Stalin, who was, as I'm sure you're aware, was the leader of the Soviet Union during the time. He was an absolute tyrant. He was responsible for an estimated between 20 and 25 million deaths during his reign, and shortly after he died, the Soviet Union, they entered a phase literally known as de-Stalinization, where they tried to remove his legacy and basically kind of, try to do damage control for him and distance themselves from all the mistakes he did. Because he was an awful person, he was an idiot. Also, he made a ton of disastrous decisions, which cost a lot of people their lives. So that's kind of what I'm expecting from this movie. I'm expecting it's going to have a sort of All Quiet on the Western Front, sort of very dark, unforgiving approach to war. I'm expecting it's going to have a lot of atrocities being committed by the Nazis. I'm expecting it's going to have a lot of heroism on the part of the Soviet troops and the partisans. I'm expecting it to have a lot of moist nuggets. So I'm going to pop that movie in. I'm going to give it a look. And then after that, I will report back to you, fellow comrades. Hello, everybody, and through the magic of editing, I am back. So, initially, after first having watched Come and See, I recorded my opinion on it, but upon re-listening to it, it was completely scatterbrained, incoherent, and was just kind of like me being like, wow, that was really something, wasn't it? And being all over the place, jumping up and down, and slamming my monkey hands because I'm an unfocused chimpanzee. But today, I have prepared notes, and I have thought about it, so I am a bit more coherent. So let me begin by saying that Come and See was an amazing movie, and I highly recommend it for anyone. Yes, that's correct. I recommend everyone go see this movie unless you are easily disturbed by, atrocities and stuff. This is an extremely brutal and unrelenting film. In that sense, I can understand how some people will be off-put by it, but it is so well crafted, and visually stunning. I you gotta go see it. If you don't want spoilers, I recommend you don't listen to the rest of it. Take my word for it and go see it now, because it is a great movie. But if you're gonna stick in with me, here we go. So the film begins with a young boy named Florian and another kid and an old man. They're out in like a field somewhere. The two young boys, they're digging up. They're looking for a weapon so that they can go and join the Soviet partisans during World War II. The old man who's with them, he's just kind of this old guy, kind of being like, "Hey, you kids, don't go digging. If you go digging, the Germans are gonna find out that you joined the resistance, and they're gonna come and they're gonna kill everybody." And the kids are just kind of like teasing him and making fun of him. So finally, Florian, who's the main character, he's a young boy. He's maybe, I'm not sure how old he's supposed to be. Maybe like 12 or 13, maybe younger. I don't know. It's hard to tell. He looks kind of like Review Bra. He looks kind of like a blonde Review Bra in an oversized, with his like oversized suit, which I'll talk about later. But anyway, so Florian finds an old rifle. I believe it's an SV-80. Not a nugget, surprisingly. I was hoping he'd find a nugget, but he didn't. So he finds the rifle, and he's going to use it to join the resistance. So he goes home, and his mother is devastated. She doesn't want her son going off to join the partisans. She wants him to stay home. I don't think it's ever mentioned what happened to their father, but he's not around. He's probably dead. Basically, his mom threatens to kill herself and then hands him an axe and says, "Why don't you just kill me and your sisters and save the Germans the effort?" And the partisans show up. They're kind of this like ragtag group. One of them's even wearing a full German uniform, and they take him away to join their camp. And he gets to the Soviet partisan camp, and it seems like everybody's having this great old time in the forest. It's a ragtag group of, freedom fighters. Everyone's got mixed match uniforms. They're all doing their thing out in the woods. They're gonna take a big group photo before the big mission. So Florian gets in on it. This scene's important, by the way, the photograph scene, and they all pack into this, get the big group photo taken. Next thing you know, it's time for them to leave. So the commander of the partisans, he's giving a speech to everyone, and he's like, "Okay, we're gonna go and fight the Germans now, but we're gonna need some people to stay behind. And hey, new kid, guess what? You're staying behind. We don't want you. And guess what? You're gonna give your boots to the old guy over here, because he's gonna be marching with us, and he's gonna need them more than you will." So this is devastating for Florian. He's now just basically been told he's not going to get to go be the big hero he wants to be, and he has to give up his boots so some other guy can have them. He's just been boot cucked, and he's devastated. After giving up his boots, he runs into the woods, he runs into a marsh, he's splashing around, he's crying, he steps on a bird's nest, crushes the eggs, and kind of like, I think that's supposed to be symbolism, which I'll talk about again in a little bit, and he comes across this young girl who he's seen at the camp before, and he's kind of, had made eyes at her before, and she introduces herself as Glasha. Now, Glasha there is something not right about her. It's never fully explained in the film. Basically, she just makes these, like, really weird facial tics, and nothing she says really makes 100% sense, and everything seems really out of context. I don't know what is up with her. It's mentioned that she was saved from a train heading to Germany, so it's possible that maybe she was tortured at some point, but she's clearly not quite there. She's very distant, and at one point she's laughing. She has like a scene where she's just like hysterically laughing for like 3 minutes before she like notices Florian and talks to him. And then she's like telling him that she loves him and she wants to have his babies, and he's just kind of like, "What?" And then she starts making fun of him. It's just a very bizarre scene. So after that, they notice that the German bombers are flying overhead, and the camp just gets blown straight to hell. So Florian and Glasha, they run off into the woods. There's Fallschirmjägers falling from the sky, And so they manage to escape the bombing and the troops, and they decide to hide out in this kind of like this hollowed out tree. So this scene is really weird because they decide to hide out in this like basically like lay down in this like hollowed out tree, and as they're doing so, this weird bird creature, I'm not sure what kind of bird it is exactly, maybe it's a stork. I tried to Google it, but no one really seemed to say online. Maybe like I'm the only person who is that picky enough to care what specific species it is. Anyways, this bird walks into the tree and just kind of stares at them. And then they wake up, and there's this this weird psychedelic sequence where they frolic in the rain, and Glosha's dancing on top of Florian's like box he was carrying, and whatever. Anyways, it's a bizarre scene, and the bird watches them do it too. And I don't know if maybe it's implied that like they were boning in the tree. That's my theory. I might elaborate on that later, but I might not. Anyways, so Florian's like, hey, why don't we, since like the base has been destroyed, why don't we head back to my village? I'll introduce you to my mom, and we'll just hide out there for a while till the commander gets back, and it'll be great. So they head back to Florian's village, and they get to the village, and there's no one outside. There's flies everywhere. There's like a dead animal in the street. But Florian, he doesn't seem to care. So they get into the house, and Florian's looking around, and there's flies buzzing everywhere, but he doesn't seem too bothered. He's like, oh, you know what it is? Mom, she must have gone shopping or something. Don't worry, she'll be back. So he's walking around the fly-filled house in the abandoned village, and he finds a pot of stew, and he's like, oh, look, it's fresh. Mom just made it. Let's have some. So him and Glosha start eating the soup, and Glosha begins to vomit, and he gets this kind of like disgusted look on his face, probably because the soup is presumably days old at this point. So they run out of the house, and Florian is like, hey, I know where they are. Don't worry. They must be hiding out on the island where it's safe. So they decide to run to this island, which I guess is across like a bog or something. And as they're running through the village, the camera is like following them, and as they get past this one building, you can see that behind the building, all the villagers are stacked up dead behind this one building. But the way you can tell that from the way they're running, that Florian doesn't get a chance to see it, but you do see Glosha look back, and she notices it, but then she doesn't say anything about it. So they manage to get across the like bog or whatever it is, and she tells him, and he freaks out and tries to choke her and throw her in the bog, but then he kind of regrets it and goes to help her. While they're like squabbling and fighting, this man, I think his name was Rubej, he sees them, and he's like, oh, hey, you guys don't seem okay. You should come with me back to my camp. So he leads Florian and Glosha back to his camp, and when we get to the camp, it's more of like a refugee camp, not like a partisan camp. And there's all these old babushkas. They all say to him, they see Florian, and they all start crying, and they're like, Florian, your mother and your sisters, they're dead. They're dead. And Florian is just like, he's kind of stumbling through this horde of old ladies, just kind of like about to, barely holding it together. And at the end of this horde, they get to this like clearing where the old man from the beginning of the movie is laying down on the ground. His bottom half of his body is perfectly fine, but his top half of his body is completely burnt up, and he tells Florian that the Germans came to the village when they heard that the rifles were found, and they lit him on fire, and he begged for the Germans to kill him, but they refused, and they laughed at him. And he just starts saying, like, it's all your fault, everyone's dead because of you. If you hadn't dug up that rifle, none of this would have happened, it's all your fault. So Florian just kind of is like, Florian's floored by this, and he kind of collapses and goes into like sort of fugue state. And as he's laying there and Galosha's hand feeding him what looks like spinach or something. I don't know. It's just kind of like plants. The refugees, Rubesh, he's building this like scarecrow out of like a German coat and a human skull, and you can see him like applying clay around the skull till it starts to resemble this sort of like ghastly, ghoulish zombie-looking Hitler scarecrow. And finally, after it's completed, Rubesh is like, "Hey kid, you really need to snap out of it. Why don't you make yourself useful? We're gonna go on a raid. I know a warehouse, and you'll get to be like a big hero, and we'll bring some food back for these nice folks." So he decides to go along, and shortly into their mission, things go pretty good at first. They seem like they're gonna get away, but then things get all booched, and everyone except for Florian in the group, the little squad, dies. There's like a firefight with the Germans. They shoot Rubesh and the cow that they were stealing, and Florian just kind of falls asleep, and then he cries himself to sleep basically on top of this dead cow, while using the dead cow as cover. And when he wakes up, he is a sort of like just like a changed man. He sets off to kind of like, he steals a horse cart from a local farm, and he's like trying to bring it back so he can like lug the cow back, I guess. And the farmer is like, "Hey, what are you doing? You can't just like steal my horse, kid." And like Florian's like, "You don't get it. You know, there's people dying out there. I'm trying to be helpful and do stuff while you're just pretending nothing wrong's going on." You hear motors in the distance. Dun dun dun. So looks like the Germans have finally arrived. The farmer says to Florian, "Hey, kid, there was a kid around your age who died in the village last year in a swimming accident. Why don't you come hide with us in this village? We'll pretend you're him. We'll fill you in on his family and everything. That way the Germans don't get suspicious, but you gotta bury your gun and everything. If they see that, they're gonna kill everyone on the spot." So he buries his rifle and his equipment in a hay bale, and he goes with them into the village. So the Nazis show up, and this is when the movie really just gets off the rails. The Nazis show up, and they order everyone to bring their paperwork with them and to meet at the town hall. And what happens is they herd everyone into the town hall building. They have a collaborator with them who, is instructing them on what to do. And they pack everyone into this building, and all these people are, they're all banging on the doors because they want to get out because they know something bad's about to happen. And one of the Nazis says, specifically this young SS officer, he instructs them that anyone who doesn't have a child can come out of the building as long as they're childless. So some people come out of the building, including Florian. One person tries to come out with a child, but they take the child and they throw him back into the window, basically. And meanwhile, as this is going on, it's this absolute bizarre kind of surreal circus, almost circus-like atmosphere. It's like a horrible circus from hell as the Nazis are just raiding the village. And similar to how I mentioned earlier that the ragtag group of plucky partisans were portrayed as all having mixed-match uniforms, and they're all out in the wood having a good time, but it was kind of like a wholesome good time because it was almost like they were camping kind of thing. This is the opposite of that. The Nazis are portrayed as this sort of almost tribalistic barbarian horde. They're all wearing mixed-match uniforms. Some of them have face paint on them. Some of them aren't wearing pants. The commander, the Nazi commander guy, he has this little tiny monkey. I'm not sure what it is. It's some kind of Madagascar monkey on his shoulder. There's this Nazi woman with swastika earrings. There's a motorcycle with a dead body in the sidecar holding a sign that says, "I disrespected a German officer," and that motorcycle's doing donuts. There's a guy walking through the street holding a portrait of Hitler, and underneath it says in like Russian writing or Cyrillic, it says Hitler the Liberator, and he's like walking through the streets, and there's like a car with like a speaker system playing like propaganda over and over again. And all these people, they're inside this, cramped in this building now that Florian's out of there. The Nazis light the building on fire. And as the building begins to burn and all the, men, women, and children inside are, burning to death, all the Nazis gather around and they start to applaud, and there's clapping and singing and, people holding torches and stuff. And so, like, after the fire's starting to die down, the Nazis are, kind of getting ready to leave. There's even a scene where they go into a house and grab this old lady who couldn't get out of bed, and they pick her up by her bed, and they carry her bed and just leave it outside, and they're like, "We're gonna leave you, have fun." And Florian's just kind of doesn't the courage he had found earlier when he was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go bring this cart back to, I'm gonna steal this cart, we're gonna bring that dead cow back, and we're gonna feed some people." That's all gone. That's evaporated. He's now just kind of this wreck of a human, having witnessed all this. And as he kind of stumbles around, one of the SS men, actually a couple of SS men come up to him and they grab him and they take a photo holding a gun to his head. And they're like, "Hey, let's take a photo," and they just all smile while they have holding a gun to his head. They take the photo and then they just leave him and walk away, and the Nazis kind of leave town, and Florian is just kind of this empty, distraught wreck of a human. The actor, he looks like he portrays this devastation so well. And one of the interesting things I want to mention about this movie is that in this movie, they actually use hypnotism on the young actor who played Florian. The director thought it was important to hypnotize him to try to, imbue memories. I guess that was a popular sort of parapsychological technique in the Soviet Union at the time. They wanted to try to, implant memories of the war into him to make him a better actor for this role. And I don't know if it worked, but it certainly seems to have, because he is phenomenal in this movie. So anyways, he is now just kind of wandering around, and as he's wandering around, he comes... It seems like... It's not sure how long he's wandering around, but he kind of wanders into what seems like the Nazi column that had just left the village has now been engaged in some kind of battle. You can still hear the gunfighting, and you can see a crashed car. You can see destroyed tanks and crashed cars. He comes across the Nazi girl with the earrings who was eating crawfish earlier. She's now against a tree. Her body's all broken, but she's still barely alive. And he's just kind of stumbling through this. Forgot to mention he's since gotten his military equipment back. He's got his rifle, his broken secondhand rifle back, and he's now he comes to the end of the column and finds that the unit that left him behind, the partisans, they have captured the Nazis. And the next scene is sort of the Nazis are captured, and only the collaborator guy speaks Russian. So the collaborator guy is trying to translate back and forth, and while he's plead for his own life, and sort of the Nazi commander, the sort of the Wehrmacht commander, is kind of doing this whole "oh, I'm just an old man who was following orders" kind of routine. And the translator guy's "Yeah, he's just an old man, he would never hurt a fly, he was ordered to do it, he didn't want to," kind of thing. But the young SS officer who I mentioned earlier was the one who gave the order regarding those who didn't have children, saying that they could leave the building. That guy, he says something in German, and the translator translated it. He's basically he says that that the old commander guy is being a coward and spineless coward and dishonoring Deutschland and everything. So Florian kind of is pushed his way to the forefront of the crowd by this point, and he's holding a rifle in one hand and a canister of gasoline in the other. And he's like, "It was you. You're the one who, gave the order to let those without children leave the building." And the SS man is like, "Yeah, that was me. I did it because we can't let the children leave because you're a disgusting parasite race, and if we let there be a next generation, then communism will keep spreading, and it's just easier and better for everyone if y'all just died." So then, at this point, any kind of, hope for a peaceful surrender kind of goes out the window, and the commander of the partisans, he's like, "Hey, collaborator guys, burn everyone else, light them on fire, light the fascists on fire, or whatever." So they start dousing each other in gasoline, all the collaborators and the Nazis, but then the soldiers, the partisans just machine gun them all down anyways before they catch on fire, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, so the prisoners are all dead, and the column's moving out, and Florian walks up to this, little kid who's even younger than him, who's now joined the partisans, and he kind of just, looks at him, and he hears them call out to that kid saying, "Hey, newcomer, come on, let's go." So he's no longer the newcomer anymore. There's now even younger children fighting this war than him. And as he's getting ready to leave, he sees that portrait of Hitler, the liberator, in a puddle in the mud. So he takes out his rifle and he starts firing at it. And as he fires at it, it cuts to sort of stock footage of concentration camp survivors, and then the fall of the Reichstag, and they're playing this sort of classical music but in reverse, and it's doing this sort of sped up fast motion reverse of World War II footage, and then pre-war footage of Nazi Germany, and then World War I footage, and all the while it's intercut with scenes of Florian just shooting at this portrait of Hitler, while the partisans are saying, "Hey, come on, buddy, we gotta get going." And then the final sort of shot in that scene is the portrait of Hitler's mother holding him as a baby, and Florian just kind of snaps out of it, and he decides to get going, and he joins. And the kind of sort of final shot is him joining the column as it's beginning to snow. So it is an amazing movie. It did not make me a tanky, nor is that, I think, the intended purpose of this movie, which I mentioned in my sort of what I expected portion. See, the thing is, this movie came out in 1985. The Soviet Union would cease to exist as of December 25th, 1991. This is a nation that had less than 6 years left to its name. This is a nation that was dead center in the smack of its own version of Vietnam, which was the Soviet-Afghan War. This is a nation that survived Stalinism. This is a nation that is broken. It's a nation that can't even feed its own people, but yet was built on the promise that it would be a workers' paradise. This is a disillusioned nation, and I think it kind of shows in this movie that you only ever once see a Soviet flag, and it's only in the partisan camp. You kind of you never see actual Red Army soldiers. This is a movie that isn't glorifying the state. It's glorifying the Russian people who are survivors, more specifically Belarus, which is technically a separate country. It's their own individual people, but it is a small nation, and many people kind of consider it part of Russia as a whole. I don't want to get into the whole sort of geography of, the Slavic states. That's a whole other kettle of fish. But anyways, essentially it's a movie about how the people of the Soviet Union endured the war rather than, the glorious empire of Stalin, which killed a highly contested number of people, but it is in the millions. This is not a movie about how great the Soviet Union is. This is a movie about how great the people of the Union were, and how willing they were to endure. So, let's also talk a little bit about some of the themes in the movie. The first one I want to talk about was the bird. So there's that funky bird creature that kind of follows them around, and then there's also that bird nest that Florian steps on quite early in the movie. So is it one thing I've looked into? I just kind of did a very brief research. Is apparently birds are a popular motif in some Slavic folk dress and kind of like symbology. And typically, they're associated with fertility. This would kind of make sense in the idea that this movie is sort of about a lost generation. You have Florian stepping on a bird's nest. You have the loss of the children, like all those, like the theme of the Nazis killing the children. You have Florian stepping on the bird nest. But then you also have the bird watching Galasha and Florian sleep together, and then their subsequent frolicking scene, which I wonder if there isn't a sort of double meaning there, like maybe they weren't really frolicking in the rain. Maybe they were doing something else while they were holed up in that tree. But that could just be me. Soviet censorship probably wasn't too keen on letting them depict overly sexual themes. But that could just be me being a product of decadent Western values. Who knows? And then the next theme I kind of wanted to touch on was the theme of the suit, which basically in the beginning of the movie, before he joins the partisans and gets his sort of vaguely military uniform, he's seen wearing a suit that's very large for him. The fact that his father isn't around implies to me that the suit is supposed to mean that he's sort of filling in his father's shoes, possibly even literally wearing his old clothes. And it kind of makes him, like I mentioned earlier, the ill-fitting suit kind of makes him look like a disheveled blonde review bra. But anyways, so I think like the idea is that Florian is essentially a child, but because of the horrible situation he's forced to live in, which is 1940s Russia, or in this case I should say Belarus, he is forced to kind of take on an adulthood role which he is not suited for. He should be a child, he should be having fun, but he can't. He has to be a big man for his family. Unfortunately, his family gets killed, and that is while he's away at the partisan camp. So once he's in the partisan camp, shortly after that, he changes out his oversized suit for a soldier's outfit, which I think is dealing with maybe the theme of that before the war there was probably still some idealism left in the Soviet Union that, hey, maybe if we just keep doing whatever the party says, maybe things will eventually get better. But then it never happened, and then the war came, and any idea that this was going to be the first step in a awakening of the world and everyone would have this workers' paradise kind of shattered. And it was the grim realization that they're going to have to fight the rest of the world from now on. The next theme I wanted to touch on was sort of the title, which, as I mentioned in the earlier part, is derived from the Book of Revelations. Now, it's easy to see where that comes from, because living in the Soviet Union at the time, you probably assume that this was the end of the world. This was called, the Second World War, and you were seeing your entire country just devastated and destroyed. If this is what the whole world is like, this must surely be the end of the world. But as is the case in the Book of Revelations, the end of the world shouldn't necessarily be seen as a wholly bad thing. The end of the world is supposed to bring about the kingdom of heaven. In this case, at the end of the war, there was no kingdom of heaven coming down, though. There was no opening of the gates of heaven. Jesus didn't come down with a sword in his mouth and a tattoo on his thigh. After the war, they had to reconstruct, and things really didn't get much better for them. Stalin was still around. Though the threat of fascism was gone, the real problem was now the Cold War, which was a fear rather than of a SS-man coming to your house and burning it down. You now had to fear that one day someone in Washington would press a button and a bomb would come and blow up your country. Or you would, die of horrible radiation sickness. It's not much of a step up. But anyways, back to the subject of the film. It really is a great film. It's full of really amazing cinematography. This is a war film, there's no doubt about that, but it's not one of those John Wayne action films where the heroes, go around and beat up baddies and everything. This is much more in the vein of Apocalypse Now or Full Metal Jacket. So go check out this masterpiece of cinematography. You won't regret it. At least I don't think you will. Yeah, go check it out. And I'm just gonna throw it out there. Go play Hearts of Iron 4. It's a good game. I like it. It's got a learning curve, but hey. So that's about all I have to say about Come and See. But yeah, it's a great movie. I guarantee you will enjoy it. So thank you all for listening. Have a great night.